Hey everyone, welcome to ASGM Verse. I'm honored to be kicking off the event today. My name is Amir Kazemi. I'm the Director of Product Marketing, and I'll be your host for the session. So, for those in application or product security, our speaker actually needs very little introduction. So, whether you're a subscriber of his newsletter, Resilient Cyber, or if you've read his insights and articles on LinkedIn, I'm sure you're all going to be familiar with Chris Hughes, the founder of Resilient Cyber. Chris, why don't you go ahead and give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, excited to be here and chat with you guys all. As you said, I have a Substack called Resilient Cyber and pretty active on LinkedIn underneath the same moniker, but have been in, IT cyber for about 20 years. Started off in the U.S. military and the Air Force, and then worked at different federal agencies, including doing some work around FedRAMP and cloud security for folks familiar with that. And then on the commercial side, started a consulting company of my own called Acquia with some partners and do a lot of consulting around everything from, AppSec, vulnerability management, software supply chain security, all those type of topics that we all love and get excited about. And I've written a couple books, one called Software Transparency on software supply chain security, and then one called Effective Vulnerability Management, diving deep into the vulnerability management space as well. So excited to be here and chat.
Amazing. Thanks, Chris. I think we're speaking to the right person here. So, we all know there's a lot of discussion in the industry when it comes to AI, agentic AI, and the ways AI is disrupting the security world in general. That's why, I can't think of anyone better to, have this discussion with. So let's go ahead and dive in. Um, Agentic AI's intersection with cybersecurity is a huge topic, as, we kind of mentioned. To help our audience kind of level set, how would you define agentic AI? I mean, for me, like I've seen definitions all the way across from, just chatbots to robots with arms and legs. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on agentic AI.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up the arms and legs thing. We're coming out of RSA. I just did a panel with the OWASP team there around agentic AI threats and mitigations for a paper we published. And the arms and legs seems to be kind of the parallel that's sticking, right? We thought of LLMs as a brain where you can ask a lot of questions and get a lot of output out of this with creating content and feedback and so on. And now agentic AI is kind of giving these LLMs arms and legs to go out there and interact with third-party services, tools, software, applications, data, those kind of things. So it's opened up a lot of potential of what we can do with this emerging technology. And I think it has a lot of potential both for developers and engineers, but also on the security front too. So it's really exciting stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. What type of applications of agentic AI have you kind of observed in the industry right now and today?
Yeah, I think, when you look across the ecosystem, to be honest with you, we're seeing a lot of interest and excitement of all the different niches within cyber. But the three primary ones that
Mhm.
I've seen, both from an investment perspective as well as like, research, practitioners, experimentation, is one on the SecOps side. So think about like SOC SIEM, SOC analysts, you see a lot of efforts there around cognitive overload of security teams, tracking down threats and responding to incidents and reviewing logs and telemetries and stuff that humans just simply can't do at scale, and actually responding to incidents, depending on the severity and so on. The other piece is kind of governance, risk, and compliance. We all have spent a lot of time, likely doing SOC 2, HIPAA, high trust, FedRAMP, you name it, right? It just goes on, and creating
Yeah.
compliance artifacts and documentation, answering security questionnaires. And we're seeing a lot of applications of the technology in that kind of space. And then more specifically to the conversation today around application security, and I'm sure we'll dive into like, more of the nuance and details here, but we know we're drawing in vulnerability backlogs of hundreds of thousands or millions of findings in large organizations. We're often outnumbered, right, by our engineering and development peers in large environments. Trying to track down prioritization of vulnerabilities at scale can be challenging, from known exploitation, exploitability, like, all the things that we talk about. So seeing it
Mhm.
applied in that domain is really promising too. So I think that the big three are usually SecOps, GRC,
Yeah.
and application security. And each of those kind of has obviously subsets and different niches within them even.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Kind of agentic being one of the hottest trends, like coming out of 2024, continuing on in 2025 and beyond. In your, honest opinion, are we underhyped here? Are we overhyped? Are we kind of, do you think we're balanced in terms of the hype? Like where's your head at on this?
Yeah, I'm actually an optimist here. Like, I think that there's
Okay.
definitely a lot of hype and buzz, and you can see it with, valuations of companies and funding rounds, and the disproportionate amount of investment that's going into AI focused companies is dominating the landscape, right? And there's a lot of claims of, AI is or will do all the things for us, and there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of real research and experimentation and examples coming out of what can be done or what may be possible, and what organizations are already doing in some cases. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I'm an optimist in this case, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But that needs to be tempered with like real world implementation, evidence, proof of doing the thing. The thing we're talking about in many cases versus just inflated claims and slide decks and things like that, because it's easy to get caught up in the hype as well. We've seen some companies, I think recently, not going to name any companies, but large companies who went all in right initially on replacing maybe people to do certain activities, and now they're kind of walking that back and bringing some of the human workforce back in some cases. So I think it's somewhere in the middle there, but there is a lot of potential. I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. I love the optimistic view. I think there's also this like view of agentic AI still having this touch point of human AI collaboration, but there is a world potentially of like autonomous agentic AI. Are we closer to the autonomous world here, or what are your thoughts on that?
So this came up again, during the RSA OWASP panel I mentioned, and it's kind of a
Yeah.
spectrum. Like you could have activities that are autonomous in terms of low severity or inconsequential kind of benign tasks, right? That are easily
Mm.
observable and repeatable, and maybe not too impactful, right? If you automate them and it doesn't go exactly as you hoped it would, for example, and then maybe you have something on the other end of the spectrum where you're going to retain kind of a human in the loop because it could be highly consequential to the organization, or you want to have a person to kind of validate the action that's going to be taken. So I think it's going to exist on a spectrum. Talking about like
Yeah.
SOC 1, low level alert triage type activities, be maybe blocking builds for deployments. Responding to incidents and changing configurations and environments. So it's going to exist on a spectrum of autonomy, from semi-autonomous to fully autonomous, depending on the impact and the severity and like kind of the consequence of the incident or situation involved, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all, it's all about the context there. So yeah, that's great. We've seen a lot of systemic challenges within AppSec in general, like, being outnumbered by vulnerabilities. The security developer ratio also is like a little bit outnumbered. I think there was a data point around there's one AppSec engineer for every 100 developers, right? A lot tighter budgets for security tools. Do you think security teams should be adopting AI to kind of scale themselves, be more productive? And how so? How much? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've actually been giving, I think, at least to some of my security peers, a bit of a counterintuitive take here, which, in security, if you look at previous technological waves like cloud and mobile and SaaS and like all these type of things, security is always, if you're familiar with crossing the chasm, security is always like a late adopter or a laggard, right? We're very risk averse and reluctant to adopt new technologies. We think about all the things that can go wrong, and we sit back and kind of want to have a perfect threat model, and we want to really have everything fleshed out. And in many cases, and then AI is a perfect example of this, the business, our engineering peers, development community, et cetera, they're early adopters, they're innovators with these
Hmm.
technologies. And then we kind of perpetuate that cycle of bolting security on rather than building it in, as we often hear it called. And I think in this case, we have an opportunity in the community, and I'm starting to see some of this, to be honest with you, which is really cool. I think we're learning from lessons in the past. We're starting to see security be an early adopter and even an innovator with this technology to say, what is the art of possible? We know the business is using it, right? We know our development peers are using it. We know attackers are using this technology to see how they could be more effective and have a bigger impact in their activities and streamline activities, et cetera. Like, how can we in the AppSec
Hmm.
community do something similar to address some of the systemic challenges you're talking about, whether it's being outnumbered by development peers, whether it's the vulnerability backlogs that we can never catch up with, and the double digit CVE growth year over year, right? Or now we have this coding assistance and LLM driven development that's making developers even more productive, kind of expanding that attack surface even more quickly than it has been historically when we already struggle to keep up. So I think we have no choice but to kind of lean into this technology and try to be an early adopter and innovator with this technology if we want to try to keep pace and kind of address some of these systemic challenges.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I think, typically security would be kind of laggards in, new innovations like this, but I think they're, becoming more the early adopters in this, which is both, exciting, but also, could be interesting to see what comes out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I've been answering, like, people will ask, like, what do you think the biggest risk is, right, of agentic AI? And I've been actually saying the biggest risk is that we aren't an early adopter and an innovator of, of using this technology. One, because again, like, we'll have a hard time keeping up with the business. We'll perpetuate the kind of
Mhm.
bolting on rather than building in security. And two, it's really hard to secure something if you don't understand how it works. So if we're not using this technology ourselves, we can't really realistically anticipate ourselves being able to secure it either.
Yeah. Let's figure out how to adopt it. And then once we figure out how to adopt it, then we can also secure it as well. Yeah, I read
Right.
that.
Yep.
Um, let's talk a little bit more about the specifics on the upside for areas of applying AI to application security. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, where is it going to be able to help us to be more effective in our AppSec programs? Like, do you have specific recommendations for people kind of running their programs?
Yeah, I've been seeing, obviously there's a lot of startups and innovators, and even large enterprise, players working on this. And I've seen some really interesting uses of it so far. We've seen some research showing that it's pretty effective at finding new vulnerabilities in some cases that we hadn't already been aware of, which, is helpful to go identify new vulnerabilities and go about, trying to bring them to the attention of people to remediate them, whether it's reviewing code bases or looking at running applications, things of that nature. There's also the ability that I've seen been applied to, provide like highly robust, comprehensive feedback to developers native in their workflows of, why something is a risk or a vulnerability and how to go about remediating it or making it more secure, integrating with their native workflow. And that's something I think that in particular lately has been kind of driven by, the rise of what we call MCP, or the model context protocol, that got really popular in the past like month or so, it seems like.
Mhm.
And then additionally is just like helping with the prioritization problems of, like we said, like looking at things, whether it's known to be exploited, it's likely to be exploited, like EPSS and things of that nature. If it's reachable, whether it's source or runtime, are there compensating controls in place? I think trying to make sense of that within your architecture, tied to vulnerabilities, is a great use case, and an area where we'll see a lot of potential here too.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to flip the script here a little bit on the agentic AI side. So we talked a little bit about the productivity of, the potential productivity of agentic AI. What about what type of, security considerations should we be keeping into consideration here? So what are the risks that we should be aware of with agentic AI?
Yeah, there's a lot in this whole conversation, could be like enumerating potential risks or known risks. Like, there's groups like MITRE, who have their Atlas framework, which is kind of built on attack, but, tailored to AI systems, which is great to take a look at. There's Maestro, a threat modeling framework that came out that's specific for agentic AI systems, looking at agents, the agent ecosystem, deployment and infrastructure that's hosting these kind of systems, the overlaying kind of security and compliance angle to that. And then there's, the emerging ecosystem itself. Like I talked about, model context protocol, agent to agent. Like, these frameworks themselves have now been shown to have some gaps or weaknesses, whether it's in how they handle authentication and authorization, or interacting with one another in a secure fashion. And then looking at, like, there was a great research that came out. I think it was called Backbench. And it looked at, like, the security of the code that gets created by these coding assistants. And it's not amazing, right? But neither are human developers, right? They make mistakes. They produce vulnerable code. And often these models that are producing this code and that are being used by these coding assistants are trained on, large portions of open source software that's out there, which of course has known vulnerabilities and weaknesses and maybe isn't maintained very well. So these tools are often going to kind of perpetuate those known problems just at scale. Like, think about it. If we're 40% more productive, right? Or the coding assistant is writing, X percentage of code, it's going to kind of scale those problems even more than they have been historically. And I think it's gonna create some new novel attack vectors, like I talked about with new protocols and, agents and things of that nature. But it's also gonna have the potential to exacerbate existing challenges that we already talked about too, when it comes to, vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And if we're just producing more code, more applications, more attack surface, it's essentially gonna kind of magnify existing challenges too. So
Yeah.
it's a double-edged sword because I think it has a lot of potential. It can help us. It has a lot of promise of how we can leverage it in a good way. But again, it's going to also be a challenge to go about securing it and using ensuring our peers within the organization are using it securely too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Do you think that this also exacerbates the whole NHI, non-human identity problem as well, when you have agent-to-agent collaboration?
Yeah, yeah. I think you probably have seen me talk about this, but yes, I definitely do, and I think many other people are picking up on this. Like, we know that if you look at like reports like DBIR and MTrends and others, like we are awful at securing identities and credential compromise is always a leading attack vector. And now you throw in like agents and these non-human identities that are going to outnumber us like, exponentially in the enterprise. Based on projected research and estimations and so on. It's just going to make those
Mhm.
challenges far more daunting than they have been in terms of provisioning the identity, deprovisioning it, right scoping the permissions associated with the identities, ensuring that the identities of the agents don't get compromised and used to do things like privilege escalation or move laterally in environments. So yes, it's going to open up a whole kind of Pandora's box around identity and access control, which we've already struggled with, like I said, historically. But now it's kind of amplifying that as we exponentially become outnumbered by agents in the enterprise and have to govern them and the identities of the agents, the permissions of the agents, what they're able to do, what data they can access, what systems they can interact with, that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, we have some interesting times ahead when it comes to identity and access management, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, for security practitioners, professionals that are kind of overwhelmed with the AI hype that's going on here. So, what critical questions do you think that they should be asking themselves to, more realistically assess the potential value of leveraging AI to address like some of these challenges that you were just talking about?
So from the perspective of like critical questions that they could be asking is like, when you're meeting with these vendors and potentially the claim of what their product can do, kind of powered by I would ask to see some of that in production, see some case studies of known customers and proof points of having done this right in other places, not just necessarily what
Yeah.
could be done or is possible. And then, from the security perspective, like is honestly the fundamental questions that we always ask in like basic threat modeling, like what are we working on? What can go wrong? Those kind of questions that we know from like threat modeling 101. Because I think there is a lot of potential there, but it's easy to get caught up in the hype of a vendor saying they can do X, Y, and Z and not necessarily showing you like we have done this. We've proven that we can do this at scale in similar environments, similar customer environments as your own. So just seeing it in action, I think is going to be key, and having, working with vendors who are proving that they can do some of these things versus just making claims, around what they can do without necessarily showing it. And that goes well beyond AI. We see that a lot with security vendors and products in general. And this isn't like a shame on vendors, it's the nature of the industry. But just like, not necessarily don't tell me what you can do, show me what you can do and show me that
Yeah.
you've done it before.
Yeah. Yeah. Before they even speak to these vendors to kind of see the proof in the pudding behind like the AI technology, how should some of these, AppSec security professionals evaluate whether AI is actually even the right solution for a particular use case or security problem that they have? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that's a great question. And honestly, I wish like our business peers and engineering peers would also step back and ask like, what's the, kind of business use case that we're trying to get out of this technology?
Yeah.
Because there is a bit of FOMO, right? Like everyone's just using it for the sake of using it or applying it to every use case, even when it's not necessarily warranted or the right fit or whatever. It's just to be saying we're using AI, right? We're AI native, we're
Mhm.
AI first, whatever, whatever term they want to lean on. But from the security perspective, it's like, why is this a problem? Do the existing tools and technologies in the landscape, not suffice? Do we need to lean into AI and LLMs and Gen AI, et cetera, to kind of address this? And if so, is there even proven technologies out there, tools or products that use AI in this context to be helpful? Or am I just kind of like as they say, a hammer looking for a nail, right? Like I'm just trying to apply it to any example without really being a valid use case or business justification for doing so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, one of the last questions that I have here for you is, for security leaders that are listening here, what are the first steps that they should be taking now to educate their teams and prepare for the increasing influence of agentic AI? in AppSec? How can they educate themselves on this stuff, and not only now but also moving forward into the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and honestly, it could be a lot. Like I try to keep up with this space, and every time I open LinkedIn or open up my browser and go to the web, there's a new publication from Cloud Security Alliance or CNCF or OWASP or you name it. Right? There's a new framework. There's a new benchmark, a new model. Something out there, right? That's new, a new threat modeling framework I need to get familiar with, and it can be overwhelming. Honestly, it's to me, and this is just my personal perspective and how I approach it, is kind of like exercising or hygiene, like brushing your teeth. Like every day, a little by little, I just kind of chip away at something that I think is interesting or promising, or that I want to learn more about and become more competent in, and leaning into those communities that we have out there. Like I said, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, OWASP, Cloud Security Alliance, vendors like Cycode and others who are doing research and putting information out there on AI, Gen AI, LLMs, and the intersection with AppSec, things of that nature, and just kind of fostering that culture within the organization of encouraging people to go out there and learn and grow and develop themselves, and not making people feel silly for asking questions. Right? We're often afraid to ask something because we're afraid we're going to seem dumb or incompetent or something like that. Like I'm more afraid of not finding out and walking away still having a knowledge gap. I'd rather just say, hey, I don't know this. Like I really want to learn it. I really want to understand this better. Can you help me? Like who's talking about this? Who's written a book on it? Who has published research on it? Who has some good resources they could provide? There's a lot of newsletters and things like that, blogs and so on out there on these topics too, and just kind of like becoming immersed in that ecosystem of knowledge and information out there that you can keep learning and growing and developing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I guess another way is to follow and subscribe with you, Chris. How can the audience go ahead and do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. As I said, Chris Hughes and/or Resilient Cyber. My site is resilientcyber.io. It's also on Substack under the same name, and I'm often sharing interviews with industry leaders on everything from AI governance, AI's intersection with AppSec, GRC, SecOps. Some of the vendors in this space, some of the researchers, just having conversations with them, trying to learn, and then sharing, some of the publications and research and things like that that are coming out. So definitely check that out. And I'm there learning along with the community. So I really enjoy being part of it.
Amazing. Chris, a huge thank you for your time today and sharing your predictions and your insights with us. With that, I'm going to be handing it over back to Karina, who's going to take us on to our next panel. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.